Hello KS4, this is Mr. Lester, and today we're going to be producing a first-hand observational drawing of an object relevant to your project. Now it needs to be relevant to your project, whether it's going to be landscape, still life, natural forms, portraits. So by now you should have actually chosen and been well versed in what it is you are producing for your GCSE artwork. We are going to be doing assessment objective 2, which is use of materials today, and hitting assessment objective 3, which is visual recording. So, first off, let's choose our object. Now, I'm going to choose a still life object, which is this trainer. Now, this trainer could be relevant to still life, it could be relevant to portraits, as is an object that identifies myself. If you are doing another project, like for example landscape or still life, you could choose natural forms, flowers, vegetables, leaves, fruits, a still life setup, etc. If you're doing portraits, you could choose a photograph working from first and from a mirror, or an object that symbolizes and references the identity of that person, or even working from a photograph if you want to. Okay, so you have to choose an object, a subject that's relevant to your actual project. Now, to do this, first of all, we're going to need our object. We're going to need a good piece of cartridge paper. We're going to need a good pencil, and we're also going to need a rubber, and make sure we have our other selection of apparatus. That's what we're going to need for the first part. So the first thing we're going to do is produce our first hand drawing. I'm going to position my trainer so I can see it carefully, I can see the whole of it. I'm going to draw exactly what I see. So, using our measuring techniques, I'm going to break it down into simple shapes. Okay, drawing from the angle that I see, breaking it down into our shapes that I can see. Very, very simply, doing a simple plan, almost gesture sketch. Okay, you can see how I'm keeping everything very, very loose and fluid at the moment, following the lines as well. Using my fingers to measure my proportions and following my curves, making sure my trainer looks as 3D as we can get it. Modifying my drawing as I progress. Drawing my trainer how I see it. Now it's important whenever we're doing an observational drawing that we look at our trainers, or we look at our objects much more than we're looking at the paper. Okay? You should be looking at your object every 2 to 3 seconds. Really studying your subject. Looking at every little curve, every piece of detail, mapping that out. Drawing what you see. If there's a bump there, then you draw the bump there. If there's a crevice there or a line, then you draw the crevice and line how you see it. Okay, looking very, very carefully at the distance and proportions. Again, this is just planning out at the moment. Drawing what you see. Looking at the direction. Okay, I can see from observation that there's a little bump here, so I'm going to draw my little bump. So once we've completed our map out sketch, then we start to apply our form and refine our shapes and start applying our details how we see it. We draw the laces how we see them. If you can see that going off in a loop, then I draw it how I see it. drawing what we see and not what we think we know. That is important, key stage 4. Now it is essential to have very good drawing as part of your GCSE to get a very good mark. So concentrating, looking very, very carefully at all the lines, at all the details, making our changes as we progress. As you can see, it's starting to take a little bit more of a shape. You can see I'm starting to define my actual lines as well. Varying the pressure of my pencil, defining my lines. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. What makes a good artist is your ability to modify your work as you progress. Make your changes, continuously self-evaluating. Now there's a difficult part, it comes round. As you can see, I'm tracing my pencil first, then do my shape. And I'll continue building this drawing up, looking at my laces. Put that over a little bit. Checking and rechecking my drawing, comes around a bit more extreme. Then I've got the curve here. Now this is a line drawing, we're not adding any tone to this because we're actually, for today, going to be using an alternative. In fact, let me swap this drawing. I'm going to one that I've just done a little bit earlier. Today we're going to be using an alternate paint substitute, and the paint substitute I've chosen for today is beetroot juice. Okay, can you see this? So this is the juice of the beetroot, and you can see there's some pulp at the bottom as well. We're going to use this beetroot juice as an alternative to paints that we may buy. Now there's many alternatives that you can use. There's coffee that can be diluted in water, tea, there's turmeric, spices and paprika that gives interesting like effects. But today we're going to be using beetroot juice. So the equipment that you're going to need for this is not only your beetroot juice, you're also going to need some water, okay? You're also going to need your brushes, your watercolour brushes. Now I've got 2 different brushes. You're going to keep with your pencil, and for later on we may even introduce some pens for later on. Now, just like normally with watercolour, when we apply our colours, okay, our beetroot juice, we're going to look very, very carefully. Let's mix this up a little bit. We're going to look very, very, very carefully at where our tones fall on our object, okay? Same with watercolour. When applying our paints, we hold our paintbrush just like a pencil or a pen. So we've got maximum control, and it's something that we're used to, and we paint with the tip of our brush. We're observing our subject very, very carefully and painting what we see. And as you can see, I'm looking carefully at my darkest areas first. Now this beetroot juice is producing a very light pinky red hue at the moment, and that's okay, because we're going to use this just like watercolours and build up on our tones once they dry. So I'm looking carefully, I'm just doing the darkest areas first, and if it's hard to see darker tones, then what you're going to do when you're looking at your subject, you're going to squint your eyes, and what that does, it reduces the image, cuts out the light coming into your eyes and reduces the image into more tonal values. Right, makes the tones easier to see. Right, so I'm squinting and I can see that it's a little bit dark around here. So I'm going to apply my beetroot. I can see that it's very dark in between the laces and actually on the bottom parts of the laces. So I'm going to apply my beetroot juice there as well. Okay, applying it to our darkest areas. Again, onto what we see. I can see that it's very, very dark underneath where the tongue lays. Let's give that illusion of depth by making it very dark here. And in the actual inner sole of the shoe, it's very dark there as well. So basically, I'm using this beetroot juice to apply some of my darkest tones. Just like watercolour, I'm going to build this up in layers. Right, let's leave that for a few seconds. Okay. Now, leave it for about 30 seconds. Let the beetroot juice soak into your paper, and once it's dry, then we're going to start applying and building up on top our darker tones. Now, just like with watercolour, the more concentrated the beetroot juice is, the more darker the tone is, and when we apply water to it, we can actually pull out the pigment and make it lighter. So we can now actually add water to the areas where it's a bit lighter and start pulling our pigment into it, creating our different grades of tone. Now for this video, I'm doing this now, but if you were to do this at home, you should let your first layer dry first. Okay, because just like watercolour, it is hard to control, especially if you do not want to go wet into wet. Let's put some lighter tones here and lighter tone there as well. Now these laces are going to need to be a lot darker with a lot more pigment. Because the laces are dark. Using the tip of my brush. Remember, you need to do this and you need to have a good drawing first. The drawing is essential for your mark. Use water to pull out this pigment. So at the moment we've got different grades. Let's put a little bit of beetroot juice here. Use some water to blend it out, creating our lighter tones. This would be so much darker here. So let's get to the bottom, get the pigment, that strong pigment. Now, once this dries, as I said before, you're going to, just like with watercolour, you're going to build up your glazes, basically putting colour on top of colour to make your tones darker. So we're going to revisit our darkest tones once this dries, and we're going to put in our darker tones. Now you've got to be very, very careful, because if it's not fully wet, as you can see, the paint is bleeding into each other. Okay, the paint is bleeding into each other. So you should really leave this, let this dry, and then we'll come back to it again in another lesson. Okay, thank you, KS4, and I'll see you later.